So, a little bit about myself. I have been in the industry for about 20 years, working across multiple geographies in various companies of scale. And inclusive of that, I've been at the firm for 8 years, which has allowed me truly the opportunity to partner with many first time founders as well as serial founders as they're thinking and building out their organization. Many of that to start distributed or thinking through what a growth plan can look like. So I've really been able to have truly a front row understanding of the common challenges and a lot of those best practices and inner workings for crypto companies with a distributed workforce, but also coupled with crypto nomads. And how do we think through some of those best practices? And it's really been such a great opportunity to work with so many of our founders and helping through those best practices, because many of us will acknowledge it's very challenging to build an organization. And I really want to be able to share so many of those best practices with you. As I was developing this presentation, I came across a very interesting stat. It was a survey that was conducted by PwC. It was inclusive of around 10,000 distributed projects, inclusive of 200 companies and 30 countries. So a great sample size across various industries. And what their intent was to look at from a project from the conception to the completion, what was successfully completed. And in my mind, it came around 40 to 50%. And I think you'll also be very surprised by this number. Only 2.5% of those 10,000 projects that were surveyed, only 2.5 were successfully completed. And that's why it is so important of what we're talking today, is I really want to give you some best practices to avoid being one of the 97.5% of companies that didn't have a successful project. And that'll dive into some of those strategies in really building a successful distributed workforce. And one of the pieces when we're thinking through this, there's really 3 optimal strategies, and it's thinking about your people, hiring the right people, the right skills. And I'm going to talk to you about a framework for that as well. Secondly, thinking about what is the infrastructure. And I know many of you are probably thinking about decentralization, or if you're also building out a network. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is you can leverage in either scenario. And then processes, right? One of the things we should be thinking about, which is very specifically, is decision making, how to think about feedback. How are we going to disseminate information across the organization? And I'm going to do a deeper dive on each of these, but I thought to really optimize, kind of not just giving you the best practices, is to walk you through specifically a case study of a company that I had an opportunity to partner with. And they had a pretty aggressive timeline. The intent was to grow from a team of 5 to 20 in 6 months. And it was across various functions in multiple geographies. And so I'm going to walk you through the next few minutes with that lens in mind. And one of the things that I think we can think about when you're building an organization or thinking about building networks, your people are your most important resource. It is, if you think about building an organization, it's about hiring the right people at the right time and at the right place. It's what I really call truly the 3 R's. And I think what's really interesting is when we were looking at the organization of what we needed to build, we knew it was so competitive, the talent that we were going after. It's, as you all know, in building organizations, it is tremendously tough. When you think about hiring the right people, it has to translate into building the right product and ultimately revenue because of the changing environment, right? We have to give ourselves that competitive advantage to win. And that truly is by having the right people. And so the framework, as I was mentioning a moment ago, is really the 3 R's. And the first thing that we did was we sat down and really looked at primarily what were those skills and the experiences that we needed, because we had to do this across functions. And we weren't looking for people with skills right now at 6 months. We were looking at folks that were going to be able to grow with us within 12 months and 18 months. And the CEO also had a very strong vision of the culture. He wanted to really have a culture where there was integrity, people were passionate about what they were doing, play to win. And one of the things is people also that were agile and could adapt very quickly and working cross-functionally. And we were able to build very specific interview questions that would complement the technical skills, because with an aggressive timeline, we just did not have the opportunity to make a bad hire. So we really sat down, understood the profile that we were looking for from a candidate perspective, but we also wanted to ensure that we were setting people up for success. So we really instituted a very robust onboarding program. So people knew even before they came into the company on day one, what they were going to be working on, the teams they were going to be partnering with, how those teams operated. And we were very clear as also what success looked like and also what failure. So we were trying to minimize any ambiguity where we could, because we wanted to ensure we had the right people at the right time. And then in addition, as you're hiring, right, you've raised a certain amount of capital. We had to really think through how are we going to pay folks. So we looked at building salary bands, equity. Also in the crypto organizations, right, there's the allocation of tokens. So we really spent some time thinking through what that compensation philosophy could be and how we could attract talent that was not familiar with crypto or how tokens operated. So that was a really great opportunity. Now that we knew with the right people, we had to figure out timing, because we had to figure out when we hired our engineers, our designers, research, our community managers. And so it really allowed us to understand what the milestones we were going to achieve and to hire the right people at that time and the right framework. During this exercise, it was very interesting. We were able to identify some community managers and engineers that were actually located in Europe. And actually 10 of the folks we wanted to hire were in Europe. And this is what I always caution folks on. If you're going to be hiring in different countries or even different states, it's something to be mindful of. You need to be thinking through what are the employment laws, any implications if we have to hire or fire. There's additional costs associated with statutory benefits. And then in conjunction with that, we also wanted to make sure, did we want to do a cost benefit analysis to really determine if we wanted to establish an entity, or even possibly if we wanted to do a PEO. And I laugh, that's kind of just a fancy name for a professional employer organization for HR. And what it does is it allows you, if you're going to hire in different locations, we established a PEO. So when we were able to hire somebody, we could immediately hire that day. And it was kind of funny, even before I got on this call, I had one of my companies telling me, Tina, we need to hire somebody in the UK right now. And what we were able to do is drop an email to our contact at the PEO, and we're going to be looking at getting an offer out. And part of it in being the competitive environment, you need that competitive advantage. So one of the things after we looked at the right place, the right time, I really wanted to kind of share with you, I talked a little bit about this, is how important onboarding is. Because I know when we're moving very hard and fast, we just hire people and then we let them hit the ground running. I want to talk to you about really the business impact if you have a very strong onboarding that's cohesive, and it can increase your productivity by literally 70%. And just think about the cost savings that you can achieve and just the resources. So I want to take an opportunity and just walk you briefly through some best practices in building truly a functional onboarding. And if you think about an onboarding program, it really, for us, when I was working with the CEO, it started as soon as we opened a job rec. It was an opportunity to say, here's the 30-day plan. Here's what the person is going to be working on. Here are the outcomes. Here's what success looks like. There was also inclusive of a training program. So folks that were going to submit code, people knew how to do it. It was also very inclusive for us of how we operationalize, how we give feedback, how are we going to do our day-to-day. And you've heard me say a couple times, and I'm probably going to hone in on this. It's really important in any onboarding program or any building of a company is helping people understand what other teams are working on, not just for them to be, performing well in their job. It's really instrumental of the trust that you're building in your organization. And if you can do that up front, the value when you start to have conflict and issues, you'll be able to see the momentum and people being able to navigate through that. And I would also say one of the things that we did is we did check-ins, and what that is, and I don't think you have to be overly prescriptive, but we were checking in to see how things were working, what were the challenges the person was facing, and be able to get in front of those issues up front. Or if there was a potential issue, we could actually address it immediately. And I think that's really important is with, especially in even the times we're in now, is checking in to understand how your people are performing, what are their issues. And that really ties into ultimately creating a culture of social belonging. And so if you think about the onboarding process, it's twofold. To get people up and running, they understand how an organization is going to function, but also building some of that trust and integrity up front, which was really important to the CEO. Now you've hired the right people, right? We've got an onboarding place and plan. Now let's take an opportunity and really think through what was the organizational structure. And that's what was so important for us, is to really understand how people were going to be reporting. Because in a decentralized organization, you really need to understand how product will operate, how it will interact with engineering, the opportunity, how it will even engage with community managers. And you've got to establish that quick, whether these are going to be managers. One of the things that we also had to decide, do we bring in experienced managers or do we have folks actually be in a lead capability? And that was something we were really trying to focus on with them as well. And then in addition, it was really important to really put some parameters as to here were the job roles of what they were going to be working on. And again, it was really, we wanted to understand also what motivated people in their roles so that we could actually embed that as they were working with other teams, but also thinking about it from the development. And I think one of the things as you're building out an actual organizational strategy, it's really instrumental to make sure that you have the right organizational structure that will support that. So one of the things that we really took an opportunity as we were building out this organization is what did we need to achieve, and did the organization support it? And so I will be honest, we had to make a couple of different adjustments where originally engineering and product were together and then ultimately wound up separating them because of the direction the organization is going. So it's something to be mindful as you're thinking about building out these organizations. And I would say now that you have an organizational structure, it's really imperative to actually help people understand how they're actually going to function and what are those processes that you really think are valuable. I think in any organization where you're building a network, when you have people that are partnering together, it's really about establishing feedback. And one of the things that we took a very proactive approach is we actually went through and trained people of how to give feedback, not to in day to day. And it could also, one of the things that we wanted to ensure, because for the CEO, it was really imperative for him that he wanted his team to give him feedback as to what was working well, what was not working well. And so one of the things, if you can establish that people feel comfortable in providing real-time valuable feedback, it really will, one of the things that we had noticed is it really was able to get us through conflict a lot quicker. And a lot of people, when we're looking at our engineers, they were working on day-to-day issues. And when they had an issue, they could go talk to the product team or the community manager without management having to get involved. And that was really, really important for what he was driving to, which was a very, very cohesive team. And then I think this is what I see in a lot of my crypto companies is really ensuring that you have a decision maker. I know we're hiring a lot of senior people. We want them to have certainly the autonomy and the ability to be a part of decisions, but you ultimately have to identify someone who is going to be the key decision maker, whether that is for technical, whether it's for product, and you have to communicate that to the organization and also empower that person in their ability to make those decisions. And then I would say one of the other pieces that we were thinking about, because we were decentralized, is how do we think about communication? How do we disseminate information, right? Slack is great for giving, just quick information and feedback. But I think one of the things that we really wanted to say is if you have a technical decision, maybe that was a better Zoom meeting. One of the things is for managers day to day, if you could be in person, always great. Or if you do Zoom, those are things that you need to be thinking about when you're in different geographies. And that was something that we were very instrumental of what we thought about up front of what were the system and tools you want to be able to develop to ensure the company is successful. And then lastly, I think it's so important is building those processes that are certainly going to support the structure. And one of the things that we really did is we were constantly, as we were bringing new people into the organization, we were testing what was working and what was not. So we had this opportunity to constantly reiterate. And I would say one of the key pieces as you're building out an organization, it's so imperative to think about people, infrastructure, and process. If you can think about these strategies up front, the intent is really to avoid the scenario of being and avoiding that 97.5% of companies that have not been able to achieve a successful project. Thank you.
Cool. Great. Thank you, Gina. The first one is from Sarah, and she references the case study in your talk and is wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you train very early new hires to take on leadership right away while also making necessary contributions to the product. Or in this case study, how did you balance individual contributors versus leaders? And how do you go about thinking about the larger structure of the company when you're growing really quickly from 5 to 20 people?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question. I think one of the things that we did up front is when we knew we were going to grow to 20 people, we actually started to think about what did these roles look like very specifically and thinking about that infrastructure. Were we going to hire managers or were we going to hire leads? And I think secondly, to your question, which is how do you allow people to be leaders in an organization at the same time? One of the things that we did is we paired everybody up with a senior mentor. So a senior engineer in the organization or someone who is in product who would actually be able to sit there and mentor and guide them as they were growing in the organization. I would say the other piece that was really important for us is we actually had built a training program for both employees as they were coming in to actually how to manage projects, how to come in, how to work cross-functionally. We had actually instituted a training program with a third-party vendor to help support them.
Next question is from Paul and Abhishek. So for hiring internationally, what do you make of products like Let's Deal that manage compliance for you? Can you recommend HR tools that you think are good for hiring remote workers?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of different PEOs that you can leverage, right? Where they will, and it's a great question, they will encompass not only compliance, but they're also going to help with you with payroll taxes, the employment laws. A lot of companies use Apply Global. A lot of folks will use Auxilium Cornerstone. I think one of the things when we talk to companies about tools, there's not always one tool that'll work well for one company. We really want to understand your business, but those are a couple that we see many portfolio companies leveraging right now.
Cool. Great. Okay, next question is from Nori, and he asks, are there any best practices for managing remote sales teams effectively, particularly when no one on the founding team has a sales background? In the past, we've had difficulty getting good performance out of remote salespeople.
So one of the things that we did, right, where you have a founder where you've been building remote sales teams, we just haven't been able to, grow, be able to get the performance we need. One of the things that we've done in the past is we've brought in a third party, right, where they will actually help you think through how do you, building out a sales organization. We also have folks in the firm who actually partner with many of our companies on this area as well, where they've built out sales organizations to think about the structural components. You also think about what are you trying to sell, and then that's where the sales enablement component comes in.
So it sounds like you basically want to bring in sort of like a leadership team that can design this sort of organization at the outset, and then once you have that clear structure and guidance in place, then you sort of can build it out from there.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Next one is from Mark, and this is one we've actually talked about before. It's yes. He said it feels like a lot of crypto organizations are very flat, or at least aspire to be sort of very flat. How do you deal with that ethos while making it clear what reporting lines are?
Well, I think what we've seen is companies grow and scale, right? Initially, when it's 20, it's a lot easier to be a very flat organization. However, when you think about you grow to even 50 to 100, you have employees that are looking for employee development. They're looking at growth, right? You need management who is going to be able to build strategy, give guidance to their employees. And one of the things is it's really hard when you don't have that evolved into your organization. So what we'll see is it'll usually kind of be about 2025. And then when I started to work in is that you do bring in some level of a lead or a manager who can actually build and actually grow these teams. Because really, if you think about a manager, part of their role is to really remove barriers for their organization. And so that's where you'll see that from an infrastructure standpoint be hired.
Yeah. And one thing I might add there is that, because the space sort of has these origins of decentralization as a driving ethos, there's, I think that largely informs the flatness or the aspirational flatness of a lot of these orgs. But there's sort of two dimensions on which you have to assess organizational structure. There's the, core team and organization. For example, in the case of Maker, there's the Maker Foundation or the Ethereum Foundation, right? And there's the organizational structure within that foundation. And then separately, there's the network that that the foundation sort of spawned and put into the world. And I think the uniting principle for both is that the more complicated the decision making that you're trying to do as a group, the more you need sort of a clear management structure. Because if you don't have this is to a point you made in your presentation, if you don't have a good, clear process for making decisions, it's really hard to scale decision making. So I think it's both true of the organization, but also sometimes in the case of the networks too.
Definitely.
Okay, cool. Next question is from Meta, and she asks, compared to other fields, crypto companies seem to have higher employee churn rates. And this could be because various things, including, the fast-paced nature of the space or how entrepreneurial it is. So how do you deal with that as a small company? How do you incorporate or account for employee churn in your culture and processes?
Sure. A couple of things. What we'll do is actually assess attrition data, why people are leaving. And a couple of things some of the root causes are the interview process. Are we interviewing for the right? Were we interviewing for the right skills, experience? And a lot of it is also the profile. Can someone work, to her point, be very agile and adaptable? You can actually identify that very early in an interview process. And so it could be attributed to that, where we've seen some of those scenarios. Or I would also say the first 25 in an organization might not be the same when you're hiring 200. So one of the things that I work with the companies is and you kind of heard it in my content, is really nailing down your interview process, because it's certainly can eliminate some of those attrition issues on the back end.
Totally. That's great advice. Next one is from Abhishek. What are your tips for delegation, especially 2 or more levels deep from the CEO and escalation, or 2 or more levels above, I guess, an entry level employee in a remote environment?
So I think one of the things that we coach managers on, which is, as a manager, looking at what your priorities are, and then also looking at what motivates your employees, and looking at the skills and the experience and where you can actually grow your employees, right? It's got to be a very mindful situation. And that's where we talk to managers, which is, don't just delegate for delegate purposes, but look at something where there's alignment for where it motivates the employee, as well as where they have that skills and development. Because what we've seen is when people delegate and they don't have the right skills or experience, you can set that person up for failure. And so one of the things is being really mindful of just even their own manager of what are your priorities, and where you can even have that opportunity to develop your employee.
Yeah, I think in my experience, this goes back to your point really about hiring, right? Which is like, when you need to screen for a lot of this stuff in the hiring process, and like through that process, make sure that the employee is at the right level for the role that you're looking for. And if so, like, then it should be possible to delegate to them, right? Hopefully they have the right maturity to handle it. And so I think a lot of this comes back to running a really efficient hiring process that can eliminate so many of the problems with churn and issues with delegation, et cetera.
And again, it's right. It comes back, right? Don't hire the person for right now, but how they can grow with you from a business perspective, 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, totally. Okay, I think so. That's all the questions, and with that, we'll wrap up and let you enjoy the rest of Friday night. So thank you very much, Tina, for presenting. And yeah, thanks. Round of applause.
Oh, thank you, guys.